The snow came down so hard that Clara Jameson could no longer tell which way was forward and which was death. Her fingers so numb she couldn't feel the reins anymore. And somewhere behind her, the stagecoach lay overturned with its driver already frozen solid. She had tried to stay with the wreckage, tried to huddle in what little shelter the broken coach provided, but the wind had torn through her wool traveling coat like it was nothing more than paper, and she knew with absolute certainty that if she stayed there, she would die. So she had walked, stumbled really, leading her horse through the whiteout until even the mare had finally collapsed. And now Clara was alone in the Utah wilderness with night coming on fast, and the temperature dropping so low her breath froze in her lungs. She had been traveling from Salt Lake City to a small settlement north of town where her aunt lived, a journey that should have taken less than a day in good weather. But the blizzard had swept down from the mountains with terrifying speed, catching their small coach completely unprepared. The driver, a weathered man named Tom who had driven these routes for 20 years, had tried to outrun the storm. He had failed. When the coach hit a snow-hidden ravine and overturned, Tom had struck his head on a rock and never woken up. Clara had stayed with him for hours, trying to warm him, trying to wake him, but his skin had grown cold and his chest had stopped rising, and she knew she had to move or share his fate. It was November 1881, and Clara was 22 years old, far too young to die in a frozen wasteland. But the universe didn't seem to care much about her plans. She had come west from Philadelphia 3 months ago after her father's textile business had collapsed, leaving her family in debt and desperate. Her aunt in Utah had offered her a position teaching at the small school she ran, and Clara had accepted gratefully, seeing it as an adventure rather than exile. She had grown to love Salt Lake City with its wide streets and mountain views, had begun to feel like she might actually build a life here. Now all of that seemed impossibly distant, a dream from someone else's life. Her legs gave out finally, and she fell face first into a snowdrift that came up past her knees. She tried to stand but couldn't find the strength. The cold had moved past pain into a kind of sleepy numbness that made her want to just close her eyes and rest, just for a moment, just until she caught her breath. That was when she heard the horse. At first she thought she was imagining it, a hallucination brought on by cold and exhaustion. But then she heard it again, the distinctive sound of hooves crunching through snow and a voice calling out against the wind. She tried to shout back, but her throat was too raw, too frozen. She managed a croak that barely carried past her own ears. The horse materialized out of the white like a ghost, a massive bay stallion with frost clinging to its mane, and on its back sat a man bundled in a heavy sheepskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat tied down with a scarf. He saw her immediately and swung down from the saddle, dropping to his knees beside her in the snow. "Good God, you're alive," he said, and his voice was rough but warm, a Texas drawl softened by years spent elsewhere. "Can you hear me?" Clara managed to nod, though even that small movement took enormous effort. She tried to speak, but nothing came out except a wheeze. The man didn't waste time asking questions. He pulled off his gloves and put his bare hands against her cheeks, his skin startlingly warm against her frozen face. "Your name? What's your name, Clara?" she managed, barely a whisper. "Clara. All right, Clara, I'm Zachary Emerson. I've got a ranch about 2 miles from here and I'm going to take you there. But I need you to stay awake. Can you do that for me?" She nodded again, though she wasn't at all sure she could keep that promise. Zachary looked around at the blizzard, his jaw tight with concern. "We can't ride double in this wind. You'll fall off and I'll never find you again. Can you hold on to me if I walk?" "Don't know," Clara said honestly. "Then we'll make sure you can." He pulled a rope from his saddlebag and looped it around her waist, tying it with practiced efficiency, then tied the other end around his own waist, creating a lifeline between them. He helped her to her feet, or tried to, but her legs buckled immediately. Without hesitation, he scooped her up in his arms and stood, settling her weight against his chest like she weighed nothing at all. "Hold on to me," he said, his face close to hers so she could hear him over the wind. "I'll bring you home." Clara wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her face against his shoulder, and Zachary started walking, leading his horse with one hand while carrying her with the other. She should have protested, should have insisted she could walk, but the truth was she couldn't, and they both knew it. So she held on and let this stranger carry her through the storm, and tried not to think about how strong he must be to manage it. Time became meaningless in the white. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of Zachary's steady pace, the warmth of his body against hers, and the sound of his voice occasionally saying something encouraging, telling her they were almost there, asking her to stay awake just a little longer. She tried. She really did. But the darkness kept pulling at her, and eventually she stopped fighting it. She woke to warmth and light, and a crackling sound that took her foggy brain a moment to identify as fire. She was lying on something soft, a bed or a couch, wrapped in what felt like a dozen blankets. Her body hurt everywhere, a deep aching pain that was somehow worse than the numbness had been. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as the room spun. "Easy now," said that Texas drawl, and then Zachary was there, pressing a hand gently against her shoulder to keep her from rising. "You need to warm up slowly or you'll shock your system." Clara blinked at him, trying to bring him into focus. She had gotten only the vaguest impression of him in the storm, but now she could see him clearly in the firelight. He was younger than she had expected, probably not much past 30, with dark hair that fell almost to his shoulders, and a close-cropped beard that couldn't quite hide the strong line of his jaw. His eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green, like storm clouds over grass, and they studied her with a mixture of concern and relief. "You found me," she said, and her voice came out as a croak. "I did." He reached for something beside the bed and came back with a tin cup. "Here. It's just water, but you need to drink. Small sips." He helped her sit up enough to drink, supporting her shoulders with one arm while holding the cup to her lips with his other hand. The water was cold and tasted like metal, but it was the most wonderful thing Clara had ever experienced. She wanted to gulp it down, but Zachary pulled it away after a few sips. "More in a minute," he said. "Too much too fast will make you sick." Clara nodded and let him ease her back down onto the pillows. Now that she was more alert, she could take in her surroundings. She was in a small cabin, one large room that served as kitchen, living space, and bedroom all at once. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything was neat and organized in the way of people who lived alone. A pot hung over the fire, and she could smell something cooking, some kind of stew that made her stomach clench with sudden fierce hunger. "What were you doing out there?" Zachary asked, settling into a chair beside the bed. He had changed out of his heavy coat and now wore a simple wool shirt and denim trousers, working clothes that had seen plenty of use. "The stagecoach overturned," Clara said. "The driver died. I tried to walk for help." His expression darkened. "Where? I don't know. Miles back, I think." "I'm sorry I lost track of direction." "Don't apologize. You survived. That's what matters." He stood and moved to the fire, ladling some of the stew into a bowl. "When you're ready, you should eat something. Start getting your strength back." "What were you doing out in the storm?" Clara asked. Zachary brought the bowl back to the bedside and sat down again. "One of my horses got loose this morning before the snow hit hard. I was trying to find her before she froze or broke a leg. Found you instead." "Did you find your horse?" "No." But she's a smart mare, known these hills her whole life. She'll have found shelter somewhere." He held up a spoonful of stew. "Think you can manage this?" Clara nodded and let him feed her, too weak still to be embarrassed by the intimacy of it. The stew was simple, just beef and vegetables and potatoes, but it was hot and filling, and after a few bites she could feel some strength returning to her limbs. Zachary fed her slowly, patiently, waiting between bites to make sure she kept it down. "How long was I out there?" she asked. "I found you maybe 2 hours before full dark. You have been here about 6 hours now. It's close to midnight." "Thank you," Clara said, and the words felt entirely inadequate for what he had done. "You saved my life. Anyone would have done the same." "I don't think that's true. A lot of people would have stayed inside by their fire and not gone out into a blizzard to look for a lost horse." Zachary smiled slightly at that, the first real expression she had seen from him. "Well, she's a valuable horse. Still." He fed her a few more bites, then set the bowl aside. "You should rest more. Your body needs time to recover from the cold." "I feel like I've done nothing but rest." "You've done nothing but fight death, which is different. Now rest." He stood and moved to a trunk against the wall, pulling out another blanket which he draped over her. "I'll keep the fire going through the night. The storm should blow itself out by morning, and then I'll take you back to town." "I was going to my aunt's place," Clara said, "north of Salt Lake City. She runs a school." "Mary Jameson's school?" Clara's eyes widened. "You know her?" "Everyone around here knows Mary Jameson. She taught half the children in this valley how to read." He settled back in his chair, stretching his long legs toward the fire. "I didn't know she had a niece coming to visit. To work, actually. I'm going to be teaching with her. Or I was supposed to start next week." Clara felt tears prick her eyes suddenly, exhaustion and shock finally catching up with her. "The driver, Tom, his family should be told." "I'll make sure someone gets word to them," Zachary said gently. "And don't worry about the teaching position. Your aunt will understand why you're delayed." "I don't even know where your ranch is. How will I explain this to anyone?" "My ranch is about 12 miles northeast of Salt Lake City, up in the foothills. This is my winter cabin where I stay when I need to check on the cattle in the high pastures. The main ranch house is another 5 miles east from here." He poked at the fire with an iron rod, sending sparks flying up the chimney. "When the storm clears, I'll take you down to town myself. Make sure you get to your aunt safe." Clara wanted to stay awake, wanted to learn more about this man who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life. But her eyelids were growing heavy and the warmth of the blankets was pulling her down into sleep. She fought it for a moment, but Zachary noticed and shook his head. "Sleep," he said. "I'll be right here." So Clara closed her eyes and let herself drift off, trusting this stranger in a way she probably shouldn't but somehow couldn't help. When she woke again, it was morning, gray light filtering through the cabin's single window, and the sound of the wind had died down to nothing. The storm had passed. Zachary was still in the chair beside her bed, though he had slumped down with his head tipped back and his eyes closed, clearly asleep. Clara took the opportunity to study him more carefully in the daylight. He had strong features, a straight nose that looked like it might have been broken at some point, and weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. His hands, resting on the arms of the chair, were scarred and calloused working hands. Everything about him spoke of competence and self-reliance, the kind of man who had learned to survive in a harsh land through sheer determination. As if sensing her attention, his eyes opened, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Then Zachary sat up straight and ran a hand through his hair. "Morning," he said. "How do you feel?" "Better," Clara said, and it was true. Her body still ached, but the bone-deep cold was gone, replaced by a pins and needles tingling in her fingers and toes that was actually a relief. Much better. Good. The storm is over, so we can head down to town whenever you feel strong enough to ride. I can ride now if you need me to. Zachary shook his head. No rush. Let me make some breakfast first, get some more food into you, then we'll go. He stood and moved to the stove, building up the fire and setting a pan on to heat. Within minutes, the cabin was filled with the smell of frying bacon and cornbread, and Clara's stomach growled audibly. Zachary glanced over at her and smiled. "That's a good sign," he said. While he cooked, Clara managed to sit up fully, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. She was wearing her chemise and petticoat, but her dress was gone, and she felt her cheeks flush with sudden embarrassment. "Your clothes were wet," Zachary said without turning around, apparently sensing her discomfort. "I hung them by the fire to dry. They should be ready by now." Sure enough, her dress and coat were draped over a drying rack near the fireplace, and when Clara reached for them, they were dry and warm. She stood on shaky legs and began to dress, her fingers clumsy with the buttons. Zachary kept his back turned, giving her privacy, and she was grateful for his discretion. By the time she was dressed, he had breakfast laid out on the small table, 2 plates piled with bacon, cornbread, and fried eggs. Clara sat down and ate with an appetite she hadn't known she possessed, cleaning her plate in minutes. Zachary ate more slowly, watching her with something like amusement in his eyes. "You cook well," Clara said when she finally paused. "A man living alone either learns to cook or starves," Zachary replied. "I prefer the first option." "Have you lived alone long?" "Most of my life. I came to Utah about 8 years ago, bought some land, built up a herd. It's a good life mostly." "Mostly," he shrugged. "It's lonely sometimes, but I grew up crowded, too many people in too small a space. This suits me better." Clara wanted to ask more, wanted to know what had brought a Texas cowboy to the Utah territory, what circumstances had led him to choose solitude over society. But she sensed it wasn't the time, that they were still too much strangers for those kinds of questions. So instead she helped him clean up the breakfast dishes, and then they bundled up in their coats and headed outside. The world had been transformed overnight. Snow lay thick and pristine in every direction, smoothing out the rough landscape into gentle rolling hills. The sky was a brilliant blue, cloudless and vast, and the sun blazed down with a light that seemed almost blinding, reflecting off all that white. Clara stood in the doorway and stared, overwhelmed by the terrible beauty of it. "It's something, isn't it?" Zachary said beside her. "This land can kill you without a second thought, but it sure is beautiful doing it." His bay stallion was in a small stable attached to the cabin, along with a second horse, a gray mare that whickered softly when they entered. Zachary saddled both animals, working with the easy efficiency of long practice, and then helped Clara mount the mare. She was an experienced rider, had learned as a child back in Philadelphia, but she was grateful for his steadying hand nonetheless. They set out southwest, Zachary leading the way down a trail that was completely invisible under the snow but which he seemed to know by instinct. The going was slow, the horses picking their way carefully through drifts that sometimes came up to their chests. Zachary kept turning to check on Clara, making sure she was keeping up, and she found herself oddly touched by his concern. "You do this often," she called forward to him. "Rescue people from blizzards. You're my first," he called back. "I'm making it up as I go." "You are doing a fine job so far. Wait until we get you home safely before you give me too much credit." They rode in companionable silence for a while, and Clara found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait. The fear and exhaustion of the previous day seemed distant now, almost unreal. She was alive, she was safe, and the man who had saved her was guiding her home. It should have felt like the end of the story, the conclusion of a terrible adventure. Instead, it felt like a beginning, though of what she couldn't quite say. After about 2 hours of riding, Salt Lake City came into view in the valley below, its streets laid out in the neat grid pattern that characterized Mormon settlements. Smoke rose from hundreds of chimneys, and even from this distance Clara could see people moving about, clearing snow, going about their daily business. Civilization, safety, home. So why did she feel a strange reluctance as they descended toward it? Zachary led them straight to Mary Jameson's school, a neat brick building on the north side of town with living quarters attached. Before they had even dismounted, the door flew open and Clara's aunt came running out, her face pale with worry. "Clara." "Oh, thank God, Clara, we heard about the coach. They found it this morning and said everyone was dead, I thought." She pulled Clara down from the horse and into a fierce embrace, tears streaming down her face. "I'm all right, Aunt Mary," Clara said, hugging her back just as tightly. "I'm all right, I promise." Mary pulled back and looked at Zachary, her expression shifting to recognition. "Zachary Emerson, you found her. Found her wandering in the storm yesterday evening," Zachary confirmed. "Brought her to my winter cabin, got her warmed up. She's a tough one, your niece." "Come inside, both of you, come inside right now," Mary said, already pulling Clara toward the door. "You must be frozen, you need hot food, you need rest." "Actually, madam, I should be getting back to my ranch," Zachary said. "I've got animals to tend to." "Nonsense. You just rode for 2 hours in the cold after spending the night caring for my niece. You will come inside, you will have a hot meal, and I won't hear any arguments about it." Mary fixed him with a stern look that Clara recognized as the one she probably used on recalcitrant students. Zachary glanced at Clara and she gave him a small smile and a shrug. "You should probably listen to her. She's very stubborn." "Fine," he said, swinging down from his horse, "but just for a little while." Inside, the school building was warm and cozy, with a large common room where students learned during the day and a comfortable kitchen area beyond. Mary sat them both down at the table and immediately began fussing about, heating soup, making tea, cutting thick slices of bread. As she worked, Clara told her the story of what had happened, leaving out none of the details. Mary's face grew paler with each word. "You could have died," she said when Clara finished. "You nearly did die. But I didn't, thanks to Zachary." Mary turned to look at the cowboy, who had been sitting quietly through the whole recitation. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Emerson. You saved my niece's life. If there's anything I can do, anything at all." "No thanks needed, madam. I just did what anyone would do." "Well, you have my deepest gratitude regardless." She set bowls of soup in front of them both. "And you, young lady, are not leaving this house for at least a week. You need time to recover properly." "Aunt Mary, I'm supposed to start teaching." "The teaching can wait. Your health cannot." Mary's tone left no room for argument. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and then Zachary stood, pushing his half-finished bowl away. "I really do need to get going. It is a long ride back." "Of course," Mary said, "but please come to dinner tomorrow night." "It's the least I can do to properly thank you." Zachary hesitated, and Clara found herself holding her breath, hoping he would say yes. Finally, he nodded. "That would be nice, thank you." Clara walked him to the door, suddenly not wanting him to leave, which was ridiculous. She barely knew this man. He had saved her life, yes, but that didn't mean anything beyond simple human kindness. Still, when he stepped outside and turned to say goodbye, she found herself searching for words to keep him there just a moment longer. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything. I know I keep saying it, but I don't know what else to say." "You don't need to say anything." He settled his hat on his head and gave her one of those small smiles. "I'm just glad I found you in time. So am I." He held her gaze for a moment, and Clara thought she saw something flicker in those gray-green eyes, some emotion she couldn't quite name. Then he turned and mounted his horse, raising a hand in farewell before riding off down the snowy street. Clara stood in the doorway watching until he disappeared around a corner, then went back inside to find her aunt watching her with an amused expression. "What?" Clara asked. "Nothing," Mary said, but her smile suggested otherwise. "Nothing at all." The next 24 hours passed in a blur of rest and recovery. True to her word, Mary wouldn't let Clara do anything more strenuous than sit by the fire and read. The school was closed temporarily due to the storm, so there were no students to distract them, and Clara found herself growing restless. She wasn't used to inactivity, and after a day of it, she was practically climbing the walls. The only bright spot was the prospect of Zachary's dinner visit. Clara told herself she was just grateful to him, that her anticipation was merely natural given what he had done for her. But when she found herself changing her dress 3 times before he arrived, she had to admit there might be more to it than gratitude. He showed up precisely at 6, cleaned up and wearing what were clearly his best clothes, dark trousers and a pressed white shirt under a leather vest. His hair was still damp, suggesting he had bathed before coming, and Clara found herself noticing details she had been too exhausted to register before. The way he moved with an easy grace despite his size. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The deep timbre of his voice when he greeted her aunt. Mary had prepared a feast, roast chicken and potatoes and fresh bread with an apple pie for dessert. They sat around the table and ate, and gradually the conversation became easier, more natural. Zachary told them about his ranch, about the challenges of raising cattle in the harsh Utah winters, about the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. Clara told him about Philadelphia, about her father's failed business, about the mix of fear and excitement she had felt coming west. "Do you miss it?" Zachary asked. "The city?" "Sometimes," Clara admitted. "I miss the theaters and the libraries and the crowds, but there's something about this place, about all this open space, that feels like freedom in a way I never experienced back east." "I know what you mean. That's part of what drew me here." "What was the other part?" Clara asked, then immediately wished she hadn't. It was too personal a question, too forward, but Zachary didn't seem offended. He was quiet for a moment, turning his fork over in his hands. "I had some trouble back in Texas," he said finally. "Nothing criminal, just family trouble. My father wanted me to take over the family ranch, live the life he had planned for me, but it wasn't the life I wanted, so I left. Came out here where I could start over, be my own man." "That took courage," Mary said, "or stupidity. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference." But he smiled when he said it, and Clara could see no regret in his eyes. After dinner, Mary excused herself to attend to some schoolwork, leaving Clara and Zachary alone by the fire. It should have been awkward, but somehow it wasn't. They talked about everything and nothing, books they had read, places they wanted to see, the strange beauty of the Utah landscape. Clara found herself laughing more than she had in months, and every time she caught Zachary watching her with those storm-colored eyes, she felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude. Finally, reluctantly, Zachary stood to leave. "I should get going. It's late and I have early chores tomorrow." "Of course." Clara walked him to the door, acutely aware of how close they were standing in the narrow hallway. "Thank you for coming. It was wonderful to see you again." "The pleasure was mine." He paused with his hand on the doorknob, seeming to struggle with something. "Clara, I was wondering, would you like to come visit the ranch sometime? See the operation, meet the horses. I could show you around, teach you about cattle ranching if you are interested." Clara's heart leaped. "I would love that." Next week maybe, once you are fully recovered. Next week would be perfect. He smiled, a real full smile this time that transformed his whole face, and Clara felt that flutter again, stronger now. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him, and she was left standing in the hallway with her hand pressed to her chest and a smile she couldn't suppress. Mary appeared from the back room, her expression knowing. "He's a good man, that Zachary Emerson." "Yes," Clara said softly. "Yes, he is." The week passed slowly. Clara threw herself into preparing for her teaching duties, working with Mary to develop lesson plans and learning the names and backgrounds of all the students she would be instructing. The work was engaging, but she found her thoughts drifting constantly to Zachary, to their planned visit. She told herself she was being foolish, that she barely knew him, that one dinner conversation didn't mean anything. But her heart refused to listen to reason. When the appointed day finally arrived, Clara was up before dawn, too excited to sleep. She dressed carefully in her most practical riding clothes, knowing they would be touring the ranch, and was waiting by the door when Zachary arrived with 2 horses in tow. "Ready?" he asked, and his eyes were bright with an eagerness that matched her own. "Ready," Clara confirmed. They rode northeast out of town, following a trail that wound up into the foothills. It was a beautiful morning, crisp and cold but sunny, with no hint of the storm that had nearly killed Clara just over a week ago. Zachary pointed out landmarks as they went, a distinctive rock formation here, a frozen creek there, giving her a geography lesson without seeming to realize he was doing it. The ranch, when they reached it, was more impressive than Clara had imagined. The main house was a sprawling log structure with a wide porch and stone chimney, surrounded by several outbuildings, barns, and corrals. Cattle dotted the pastures in the distance, dark shapes against the white snow, and she could see horses in one of the nearer corrals, beautiful animals that whinnied at Zachary's approach. "You built all this yourself?" Clara asked, awed. "Most of it. Had some help with the house, but the rest I did over time." There was quiet pride in his voice. "It's not fancy, but it's mine." He helped her down from her horse and showed her around, introducing her to his horses by name, showing her the barn where he kept feed and equipment, explaining the rhythms of ranch life. Clara listened, fascinated, asking questions that made him light up with enthusiasm. It was clear he loved this place, loved the work and the animals and the land itself. Finally, they went inside the house, and Zachary built up the fire while Clara looked around. The main room was large and comfortable, with handmade furniture and windows that looked out over the valley. Everything was neat and organized, but there was a sparseness to it, a lack of personal touches that spoke of a life lived in solitude. "It's wonderful," Clara said. "You should be proud of what you have accomplished here." "I am," Zachary said, "but it's a lot for one person sometimes. I've thought about hiring some hands, but I don't know. I like the independence. The loneliness doesn't bother you." He was quiet for a moment, poking at the fire. "It did not used to, lately though." He trailed off, then turned to look at her. "Lately I have been thinking it might be nice to have someone to share it with." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibility. Clara's pulse quickened. "Zachary, I know we barely know each other," he said, crossing the room to stand in front of her. "I know it's too soon, that I should take my time and be sensible. But Clara, from the moment I found you in that storm, something changed. I look at you and I see everything I have been missing, everything I didn't even know I wanted." Clara's breath caught. "I feel it too. I thought I was crazy feeling this way so fast. Maybe we both are." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. "But I don't care, do you?" "No," Clara whispered. "I don't care at all." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a question and an answer all at once. Clara melted into him, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, and the world narrowed to just this moment, just the two of them and the fire, and the feeling of absolute rightness that flooded through her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said. "Spend the day with me. Let me make you lunch, show you the rest of the property. I promise to have you back to your aunt before dark." "Yes," Clara said, because there was no other answer she could give. Yes to all of it. They spent the day together, talking and laughing and stealing kisses when the mood struck them. Zachary made them a simple lunch of sandwiches and coffee, and they ate sitting by the fire while snow began to fall gently outside. He told her more about his life, about growing up in Texas with 4 brothers and a father who ruled them all with an iron fist, about the decision to leave that had estranged him from his family. Clara told him about her mother's death when she was young, about helping raise her 3 younger siblings, about the shame and fear when her father's business collapsed. "You've had a hard road," Zachary said, taking her hand. "No harder than yours. We have both survived, both found our way to something better. I think finding each other might be the best part." In the afternoon, he took her out to see more of the ranch, bundling her up in one of his coats because it was warmer than hers. They walked through the snow, checking on cattle, and Zachary explained how he would move the herd to different pastures in spring, how he planned to expand his operation over the next few years. Clara listened and asked questions, and found herself imagining being part of those plans, being here to see those dreams realized. As promised, Zachary got her back to Mary's school before dark, though both of them were reluctant to part. He helped her down from her horse and held her hands, looking at her with such intensity that Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "Tomorrow. I start teaching tomorrow, but maybe in the evening. I'll be here." He kissed her quickly, a promise, then mounted up and rode away. Clara went inside to find Mary waiting with raised eyebrows and a knowing smile. "Don't say it," Clara warned. "I didn't say anything. You're thinking it." "I'm thinking you look happier than I have seen you since you arrived in Utah. That's all I'm thinking." Clara couldn't argue with that. Over the next few weeks, Clara and Zachary fell into a pattern. She taught during the day, throwing herself into the work with passion and dedication. The children were wonderful, eager to learn despite their varied backgrounds and skill levels, and Clara found genuine satisfaction in helping them discover the joy of reading and arithmetic. But every evening, Zachary would be there, waiting to take her to dinner or for a ride or just to sit by the fire and talk. Mary, after an initial period of watchful concern, had given them her blessing, recognizing what Clara already knew in her heart. This was real, this was lasting. Christmas came, and Clara spent it at the ranch with Zachary, cooking together and exchanging simple gifts. She gave him a book of poetry she thought he would enjoy. He gave her a pair of riding gloves he had made himself, the leather soft and supple, fitting her hands perfectly. They spent the evening wrapped in blankets on the porch, watching snow fall and talking about the future in the tentative way of people not quite ready to make concrete plans but unable to help themselves. "If you could have anything," Zachary asked, "what would it be?" Clara thought about it. "A family. A real home with people I love, stability, joy. What about you? Someone to share this place with, someone to build a life with." He turned to look at her. "Someone exactly like you, Zachary." "I love you, Clara." The words came out rushed, like he had been holding them back for too long. "I know it's fast. I know people will say it's too soon, but I don't care. I love you and I want you to stay here with me. Marry me. Build this life we keep talking about together." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said, laughing through the tears. Yes, yes, yes. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Clara felt like she was flying, soaring, filled with a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. When they finally broke apart, Zachary was grinning wider than she had ever seen. "We should tell your aunt," he said. "We should tell everyone," Clara agreed. They rode back to town through the snowy night, both of them unable to stop smiling, and burst into Mary's school with the news. Mary took one look at their faces and started laughing. "Finally," she said. "I was beginning to think you two would dance around it forever." "You knew?" Clara asked. "My dear niece, everyone knew. You two have been looking at each other like lovesick calves since the day Zachary brought you home." But her smile was warm, her hug fierce. "I'm so happy for you both." They were married in early February. A small ceremony in the Salt Lake City church with Mary and a few of Zachary's neighboring ranchers in attendance. Clara wore a simple dress of deep blue that Mary had helped her make, and Zachary wore his best suit with a white shirt that made his eyes look even more striking. When they said their vows, Clara felt like her heart would burst with joy, and when Zachary kissed her as his wife, she knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. They spent their wedding night at the ranch, in the house that was now Clara's home too. Zachary carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition, and then they were alone together, truly alone for the first time as husband and wife. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with reverent touches and whispered endearments. Afterward, Clara lay in Zachary's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt more content than she had ever been in her life. "No regrets?" Zachary asked, running his fingers through her hair. "Not a single one. You. Only that I didn't find you sooner." Clara tilted her head up to kiss his jaw. "We found each other when we were meant to. That's what matters." The first year of marriage was an adjustment, learning to share space and decisions with another person, learning each other's habits and quirks. But it was also wonderful, full of small joys and quiet moments of connection. Clara continued teaching at Mary's school 3 days a week, riding into town in the morning and returning in the evening. The other days she spent at the ranch, helping Zachary with the work, learning the rhythms of this life. She learned to tend cattle, to mend fences, to cook on the big stove. She learned which of the horses had gentle temperaments and which required a firm hand. She learned the shape of the land, the way the light moved across the valley as the seasons changed. In the spring, they planted a garden near the house, vegetables and herbs that Clara tended faithfully. They brought in new calves, and Zachary taught Clara how to care for them, how to check for illness, how to keep them safe from predators. It was hard work, exhausting work, but satisfying in a way her life in Philadelphia never had been. Here, she could see the direct results of her labor. Here, every day mattered. Summer brought long days and warm nights, and Clara and Zachary would sit on the porch after the work was done, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. They talked about everything, shared dreams and fears and silly observations. Zachary was an attentive husband, thoughtful and kind, and Clara fell more in love with him with each passing day. In the fall, Clara realized she was pregnant. She told Zachary one evening after dinner, watching nervously for his reaction. His face went through a series of expressions, shock to understanding to pure joy, and then he was pulling her into his arms and spinning her around, laughing with delight. "We are having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Clara asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once." He set her down gently and placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "A baby, our baby." They told Mary the next day, and she cried happy tears and immediately began knitting tiny clothes. The neighboring ranchers and their wives rallied around them, offering advice and hand-me-down baby items and promises of help when the time came. Clara felt embraced by this community in a way she never had back east, where neighbors were often strangers and help came with strings attached. Winter came again, bringing with it memories of the blizzard that had changed everything. On the anniversary of the day Zachary had found her, Clara insisted they ride up to the winter cabin together. The day was clear and cold but not stormy, and they made the journey easily, Clara riding carefully in deference to her growing belly. Inside the cabin, everything was as she remembered, the small space where she had woken up safe and warm, where her new life had truly begun. Zachary built up the fire and they sat together, Clara leaning back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her and their unborn child. "I keep thinking about that night," Clara said, "about how close I came to dying. If you hadn't been out looking for your horse, if you had been even a few minutes later. But I wasn't. I found you. That's what matters. Do you ever wonder if it was fate? If somehow we were meant to find each other that way?" Zachary was quiet for a moment. "I don't know about fate, but I know that finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I will be grateful for that storm and that lost horse every day for the rest of my life, because they brought you to me." Clara turned in his arms to kiss him, deep and thorough, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. They made love there in the cabin, slow and careful, conscious of the new life growing between them. Afterward, Clara traced patterns on Zachary's chest and told him all the things she hoped for their child, all the love she already felt. "Boy or girl, it doesn't matter," she said. "As long as they're healthy and happy." "They will be," Zachary said with certainty. "With you as their mother, how could they be anything else?" The baby came in late May, a healthy boy with dark hair and his father's gray-green eyes. They named him Thomas, after the stagecoach driver who had died in the blizzard, a small memorial to a man who had tried his best to protect his passenger. Thomas was a good baby, alert and curious, and watching Zachary hold his son, Clara felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. The first year of Thomas's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and exhausted days, but also moments of pure joy. His first smile, his first laugh, his first steps. Clara cut back her teaching to just 1 day a week so she could be home with him, and Zachary adjusted his work schedule to be near the house more often. They were tired, overwhelmed at times, but deeply, profoundly happy. When Thomas was 2, Clara became pregnant again. This time it was a girl, born on a snowy January day with her mother's dark eyes and a head full of auburn hair. They named her Rose, and she was as different from her brother as night from day, fierce and opinionated even as an infant. Thomas adored her immediately, insisting on helping with everything, and Clara often found him singing to her or showing her his toys. The ranch continued to thrive. Zachary expanded his herd, hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased work, and began breeding horses as well as raising cattle. Clara finally stopped teaching at Mary's school, though she missed it, to focus on her growing family and help Zachary with the business side of the ranch. She discovered she had a head for numbers, for managing accounts and planning for the future, and became an invaluable partner in the operation. Mary remained a constant presence in their lives, visiting often and doting on her great-niece and nephew. She grew older, slower, but no less sharp, and Clara treasured every moment they had together. When Mary finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72, Clara mourned deeply, but she was grateful for the years they had had, for the love and support her aunt had provided. The children grew. Thomas became tall and lean like his father, with the same quiet competence and love for the land. Rose was small and fierce, insisting on learning to ride before she could barely walk, refusing to wear dresses when trousers were more practical. Clara and Zachary raised them with love and discipline, teaching them the value of hard work and honesty, the importance of education and kindness. More children came, another boy and then twin girls, until the house was full of laughter and noise and chaos. Zachary built an addition to the house to accommodate their growing family, and Clara filled it with warmth and love, creating the home she had always dreamed of. The years passed, seasons cycling from winter to spring to summer to fall and back again. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the valley. Thomas grew up and took over more of the ranch work, becoming his father's right hand. Rose surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to be a teacher, and Clara and Zachary sent her to the normal school in Salt Lake City, where she thrived. The younger children found their own paths, some staying on the ranch, others moving to town or further afield. Through it all, Clara and Zachary's love only deepened. They had their fights, their disagreements, the challenges that come with building a life and raising a family. But through everything, they remained partners, best friends, lovers. Every night, regardless of how hard the day had been, they would find each other, talk about their day, share their concerns and triumphs. And every night, Zachary would pull Clara into his arms and tell her he loved her, and Clara would say it back and mean it with every fiber of her being. When they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party, inviting all the neighbors and friends they had made over the years. The house and barn were full of people, music, and laughter. At one point, Clara found herself standing on the porch looking out at the gathering, overwhelmed by how much her life had changed, how much she had gained. Zachary came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "About that blizzard, about how close I came to missing all of this." "Don't think about that. You didn't miss it. You're here, because of you, because you went out into a storm looking for a lost horse. Actually, I never found that horse. She showed up 3 days later, perfectly fine, the stubborn thing." Clara could hear the smile in his voice. "So really, she orchestrated this whole thing. We should thank her." Clara laughed and turned in his arms. "We absolutely should." She looked up at her husband, at the lines time had etched around his eyes and mouth, at the gray threading through his dark hair, and saw the same man who had pulled her from the snow all those years ago. The same man who had whispered, "Hold on to me, I'll bring you home," and had kept that promise every day since. "I love you," she said. "I love you too. Always have, always will." They kissed there on the porch, surrounded by the sounds of celebration, and Clara felt complete. She had found her home, her purpose, her love. She had built a life beyond anything she could have imagined that cold night when she thought she would die in the snow. The years continued to pass. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching with joy as their legacy expanded. The ranch passed to Thomas and his wife, who ran it with the same care and dedication Zachary had shown. Clara and Zachary moved into a smaller house on the property, built specially for them by their sons, where they could watch the operations from a comfortable distance. They grew old together, their bodies slowing but their spirits still strong. They spent their days sitting on the porch of their little house, holding hands and watching the sunset, sharing comfortable silences and easy conversation. Their children and grandchildren visited often, filling their days with noise and life. On a warm summer evening, when Clara was 78 and Zachary 83, they sat together on the porch as they had thousands of times before. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Zachary's hand was warm in Clara's, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her skin. "You remember the first time we sat here together?" Clara asked. "That Christmas when you asked me what I wanted more than anything, you said a family, a home, stability and joy." Zachary smiled. "I think we managed all of that. We did. We really did." "I have something to confess," Zachary said, and Clara turned to look at him in surprise. "After all these years, you're keeping secrets?" "Just one. That night I found you in the blizzard. When I first saw you lying in the snow, I thought you were already gone. I almost rode past, but something made me stop, made me check." He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "And when I realized you were alive, when you opened your eyes and looked at me, I felt something shift inside. I know this sounds crazy, but in that moment I knew. I knew you were going to change my life." Clara felt tears gather in her eyes. "Why didn't you ever tell me that before?" "I didn't want you to think I was a madman, believing in love at first sight or fate or whatever it was." He squeezed her hand. "But it's true. I loved you from that first moment, even before I knew your name." "I loved you too," Clara said softly, "maybe not quite as fast, but close. By the time we reached the cabin, by the time you said, 'Hold on to me, I'll bring you home,' I was already falling." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Inside the house, Clara could hear the clock ticking, marking the passage of time that had brought them here, to this moment, to this life they had built together. "No regrets?" Zachary asked, echoing the question he had asked on their wedding night so many years ago. "Not a single one," Clara answered, just as she had then. "You? Only that our time isn't infinite. I could spend 1,000 years with you and it wouldn't be enough." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the warmth of his body against hers. "Then we will just have to make sure we savor every moment we have." "We always have," Zachary said, and kissed the top of her head. They sat there as the night deepened around them, two souls who had found each other in the unlikeliest of circumstances and built something beautiful together. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and wildflowers, the smell of home. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed, and closer by, they could hear their family inside, preparing dinner, living the life that Clara and Zachary had created. Clara closed her eyes and let herself feel grateful, for the blizzard that had nearly killed her, for the cowboy who had saved her, for every single day they had been given together. Their story had started with desperate survival, with a whispered promise in the snow, but it had become so much more. It had become a testament to love's power to transform, to heal, to create joy from fear and family from solitude. In the years that followed, they continued their quiet life, surrounded by love and legacy. When Zachary passed away peacefully at 89, Clara mourned him deeply, but was grateful for every moment they had shared. She lived another 5 years, spending her days telling stories to her great-grandchildren, making sure they knew about the blizzard, about the cowboy who had ridden out into the storm, about the promise that had changed everything. When Clara finally passed, peacefully in her sleep with her children gathered around her, they buried her beside Zachary on a hill overlooking the ranch, the valley, and the mountains beyond. On the headstone, along with their names and dates, they carved a simple phrase, "Hold on to me, I'll bring you home." The ranch continued through the generations, the story of Clara and Zachary becoming part of its foundation, part of the family mythology. Their great-great-grandchildren grew up hearing about the blizzard of 1881, about the chance meeting that had created their entire existence. The little winter cabin was preserved and maintained, a monument to that fateful night, and family members would visit it, standing in that small space and marveling at how much had grown from such a desperate moment. The land itself remembered them, the valley they had loved, the mountains they had watched change with the seasons. And if sometimes on winter nights when the snow fell thick and fast, it seemed like you could hear a whisper on the wind, a voice saying, "Hold on to me, I'll bring you home." Well, perhaps that was just the mountain wind playing tricks. Or perhaps it was something more, a love so strong it had imprinted itself on the very air, a promise kept not just once but forever, echoing through time. The story of Clara and Zachary became legend in that part of Utah, told and retold, embellished and preserved. It was a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, that survival and love are sometimes separated by the thinnest of margins, and that when someone says, "Hold on to me," sometimes the best thing you can do is trust them completely. Their descendants prospered, each generation adding their own chapters to the story while honoring the original. The ranch became one of the most successful in the state, but more than that, it became known as a place of love, of family, of promises kept. People would point to it as they passed and say, "That's the Emerson place." Started with a cowboy who rode out into a blizzard and found his destiny in the snow. And in a way, that was the simplest and truest version of the story. A cowboy, a blizzard, a woman who was lost, and a promise that became a lifetime. Everything else, all the joy and children and years that followed, was just the promise fulfilled over and over again, every single day in 1,000 small ways. The sun continued to rise and set over the valley. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and life went on. But on that hill overlooking the ranch, 2 headstones stood side by side, a testament to a love that had begun in the worst of circumstances and grown into something beautiful and lasting. And sometimes, when the light hit them just right, it almost seemed like they were glowing with a warmth that had nothing to do with sunshine and everything to do with the enduring power of a promise kept, a home found, and a love that transcended even death itself.